Welcome to the Vintage Downhill podcast. My name is Chuck Davis, your host. I'm joined today by my partner, Jamie Lynn, out of Britain, and Chris Baughman, out of Utah, United States. Chris, also known as Krispy, welcome and good morning.
Hello for having me.
Morning, guys.
Hey, Chris, for people who don't know who you are, can you give us the elevator pitch? Who are you and how did you come about to being here today?
Yeah, man. Thanks a ton for having me. I'm an old school downhill guy who's really into the free ride pioneering end of the sport and just an addict of anything on two wheels. So started riding motorcycles when I was a little kid. That was like my father's business, and always had me on motorcycles and bicycles, and fortunate to live in Utah where there's a lot of open space and a good sized like motorcycle community. And just kind of got to watch and be part of the bicycle and mountain bike community grow here in Utah during kind of the infancy of the sport. And always was into racing. And as we were mentioning a little bit before we started, I grew up like skiing and snowboarding and taking trips to Moab with like the scout group, and discovered like life on two wheels outside of just being on a trail or outside of a race course. And just exploring around on the sandstone, I just realized that you could kind of make whatever you wanted out of bicycling. And for me, it was like the ultimate sense of freedom, where I could just hop on my bike any time of the day, go right around the neighborhood, or take a trip, or go to a bike race. And it didn't take a lot of infrastructure. And I didn't need a truck and a trailer. I could just like throw it in the back of my car, get a ride from a buddy to a bike race, and travel. And so it's just like that sense of freedom that always kind of fuels me in my two-wheeled cycling passion.
You're kind of known from the free ride era, but I assume prior to that you were a normal cross-country guy and just started, building up your technical abilities, or how did that go?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I raced BMX a little bit, and I got a mountain bike. We're selling mountain bikes at my dad's motorcycle shop, so I managed to get a hold of one. I think it had like some Suntour XC Sport on it or something. And just was riding mountain bikes. There was only one kind of mountain biking, it seemed like, back in those days, and it was all about the climb. And I was pretty heavily influenced by my local community and the bike shop I managed to get a job at when I was like 19. And if you couldn't be with the lead group going up the climb, you were just like a kind of a second level cycling citizen. So for me, I was all about the lightweight and building everything with titanium and carbon fiber and trying to get to the top of the hill. But like in the back of my mind, there was always this thought of like, you're like driving down the street, you're looking out the window and you see a golf course and you see like a sand hole, and you're like, man, that looks like you could jump that. You're looking at the ridge lines on the side of the highway, driving in the desert, and looking at like, God, I think you could ride that stuff. So I was heavily influenced one day. The first year I worked at a bike shop, maybe the second summer, this like pack of college kids came in. They were just a couple of years my senior, and they were coming in with ruined bike parts. And they had tacoed wheels and broken forks, and I was like, what are these guys doing to their bikes? So what's going on here? And so I quickly kind of became friends with them, and they were taking their time on the climbs, and they were doing big climbs, and it wasn't about getting to the top first. And then they were pioneering these like steep descents down basically like game trails, and it was a completely different world than anything that my cycling group had ever been a part of. And my mindset quickly changed to like, oh, this is a really fun part of mountain biking. And it feels like it's something that hardly anybody is doing. And it wasn't like I was trying to do something different. It just felt right to me. Mm-hmm. And I felt like it was like opening the door to a much bigger world. And those guys are still some good friends of mine, some of which we shot with in like the early days. And getting disc brakes on the bikes and, buying like the first Marzocchi bomber, like completely changed my life. And that led me down a bit of a different path of the technology of it and the full suspension. And, growing up riding motorcycles, I wanted a full suspension bike, but I was afraid of like the mountain cycles and the foes, because I was afraid that I would get dropped on the climb. And like, I couldn't hang with my buddies. But once I found this new friend group, it gave me like the opportunity to get a different bike, and it was okay and encouraged. So that was, yeah, it completely changed my life.
So from there, this friend group you were hanging out with, you just started getting more aggro, more into Freeride. Freeride probably wasn't even a term up until
Yeah. So I had a couple of these guys, like Gordy Pfeiffer, for example. He was an extreme skier, and he was a high level extreme skier, one of the best in the world at the time. And in the summertime, he was just like riding his bike down these like chutes that were near the trail network up in Salt Lake, and like riding some gnarly stuff. And I was like, whoa, that's like a whole nother level of what are you doing? And so we started traveling with them and looking for other lines and building bigger travel bikes. And downhill bikes came along. And I mean, really one of the biggest influences me. So I had finally bought a full suspension bike. I was wary of all the multi-pivot, rickety, flexy, crappy bikes that I'd see broken coming into the bike shop. And so I was at a Trek dealer, and the Y bike came out, and I saw the rear end of that, seeing that it was like solidly made. It was a fast climber. It was super trick looking, only weighed 5 pounds. And it was like, oh, dude, this is like the holy grail. So I got on one of those, and of course I loved it because it was my first full suspension bike, and it jumped. It didn't feel sketchy in the air like a mountain bike hardtail did. And I just like had so much fun riding that bike. Entered a downhill race on it, and just like was racing cross country and downhill on the same bike, and just having so much fun. And then we had a couple locations at this bike shop I was working at, and one of them was up by the University of Utah. And Yan Carpel walks in one day, and I don't know who this dude is, and he's asking to borrow tools. He's like coming in the back door. He's got like a heavy Polish accent, and he just kind of like barges his way in and is looking to like borrow a bottom bracket tap or something crazy. And I'm looking at the bikes that he's got in his hands, is like, wow, what is that? That's a completely different deal than what I'm riding. Linkages and all kinds of welded parts, and it was so trick. And so I started hanging out with him because he was just like, once again, a completely different person than anyone else that would come into the bike shop in the 90s. And he had a little frame shop. And so I would just kind of start following him around and hanging out at his frame shop and helping him do some assembly and running errands and things. And he just taught me so much about the bike design, and he just like would just tease me so much about this Y bike I had. He just like ridiculed it, and taught me all kinds about like how the suspension moves and the swing arm moves, and how, obviously like the bike I had could never be fully active, could never track the ground the way that a bike that had like a unified rear triangle. So very limiting in what it could do. So I just started hanging out with him a bit, and ended up getting one of his bikes almost right away. I sold my bike and got one of his, and we were experimenting with different links and swing arms and geometry and just like all kinds of things. I was completely addicted. So that was another
like the VRS day.
Yeah.
He had a bike that had like a prominent swing arm, almost mountain cycle-ish, but it had a linkage underneath, almost like an Ancelotti, with eccentric mounts so you can mess with leverage ratios and curves.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know about the VRS. Is that the first Carpel you had?
Yeah, he did. He had something kind of like this guy here.
Yes.
So he had a single pivot with a linkage here, that he had a threaded rod end and adjustable cam that you could tune the angle that the link sat at, and you could tune your bottom bracket height and the progression ratio independently. And then we were making different links like practically every week and experimenting with that sort of stuff. So he told me right away that he'd found this pivot location, which is very much like a Foes. He was trying to put it inline on the down tube for simple manufacturing. And at the time, the thing had like a 46 tooth chainring, right? So he was dialing in the anti-squat around a 46. So if you had like a 48, there was a little less anti-squat, and with like a 50 tooth, there'd be basically no anti-squat. And those were because of the race courses that we raced in those days, anywhere from that size chainring, depending on the track you're racing. And so he had that pivot location figured out, much like Brent Foes did, really. And then he, I think, had kind of seen, obviously with motorcycles and things, but like the GT, the very first GT mountain bike had a linkage that was kind of similar, and that's where this threaded rod end came from. He was able to get that from, because it was already somewhat in production. but he just took it to the next level of combining these two things. The GT had the pivot point way up the seat tube, and it was semi-active, and it had serious problems under braking and all those things. So with this bike, he was able to independently tune all of those things, which is just so far ahead of its time.
What shock is on that?
Oh, I thought you might notice that. This is a Marzocchi shock with no adjustment. Yeah. I don't know how we got a hold of these. We got one batch of Marzocchi rear shocks, and I remember sending it back to get it revalved to try to get it a little bit lighter damping action. But he had like a few of the no leans, and then maybe a couple of Fox shocks, and then onto the Marzoccchis. And it was really just like because of what he could get his hands on.
Yeah. So what year is that frame then, Kris?
This would have been, I think, like in 1995. So he had ones that were older than this that had a tubular rear end. They had so much welding, it was ridiculous. And then he went to this like rectangular shaped rear end, and the eccentric cam. I think it might have had like a rod or something else right here. I don't remember for sure, but the pivot point was in the same spot.
So it looks like it might be a modified motorbike shock or something, because it's a lot bigger than the Marzocchi Boss of the era that everybody else used, like Sintesi and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I only ever saw these on this bike. I've never seen them since then, and I don't know what model it was. There was no stickers on it. It was like pre-production something, and they just never, probably if he would have ordered a couple hundred, they would have kept making them, but he probably ordered 5, and like they never made any more, and he was on to the next brand he could get some shocks from, because that's kind of how early it was in that era.
So did you start working for him around that time?
Yeah, so I was working in his frame shop. He was like in a corner of a furniture factory downtown. A friend of him was loaning him some space, and we were like reaming seat tubes and doing assembly and chasing bottom bracket shells and stuff like that. And then he moved to Reno probably in 1997 or 8 in that window. There's a lot more manufacturing opportunities there and small business tax incentives and things like that. And so he just chose to move out there kind of for those reasons, for just like a more affordable manufacturing, I think, to try to get off the ground a bit. And then he started developing the Disco Volante. So I remember seeing him at Big Bear the spring, at the Norba National in like late May, and he had moved to Reno, and he had got his frame shop up and running, and he always drove these cool like old Alfa Romeo cars. And he never had a lot of money, but he just had like one or two really cool cars. So he's like, Krispy, you got to come over and check out what I got in my trunk. So we roll over there, and he opens the trunk of his car, and he has a Disco Volante frame, and it's only partially assembled. He's got the front end and the back end, and he's holding the swing arm. And swing arms usually like move on an arc. It's a single pivot, and he holds it and he goes, it just moves like this. And I was like, no way. The thing had like 8 inches of travel, and the way that the swing arm would move vertically instead of a little less on an arc, he knew about the flex characteristics and the braking and all of these other things, and so much more tunability than he could ever get out of a single pivot. And he recognized that the cantilever beam swing arm, no matter how stiff you make it, it's only going to flex one way. It's going to twist, and they're trying to remove all the twists possible, but it will never bend in a way that could get traction. So he just knew that it was a single pivot cantilever beam would be doomed. So he came up with a triangulated rear end that could flex in the direction that you're trying to corner. And so there was a lot of things going on with the 4-bar short link suspension, which had really never been done before, and the flex characteristics. That was something totally new. So when he popped up with something like this, he had the swing arm that has kind of like rectangular tubes and yokes top and bottom, so that he could get the bike to flex the way he wanted, and a little bit of flex through the links as well, but without any of the twisting that causes it to like hop through a corner. So it would get a little bit of grip. And to think that he was like flex tuning swing arms back in like 1998 to where we're at finally these days with mountain biking, where we've realized like stuff is almost too stiff. I'm trying to get it to flex a little bit. He also, he was into speed bike snow attempts. He knew that the aerodynamics of like a swing arm beam was never going to be fast enough. So he was trying to get everything lower and triangulated so that he could have so much more tunability in the flex and the suspension rate, in aerodynamics, and he's like all these different ways. So this is like maybe a second generation. It's still got a really old front end on it. He's got the mustache gusset, and still just round tubes, though, a very simple design. This one's got bearings in it, but this bike probably had bushing pivots when it first came out. But it's been partially updated a little bit.
So what did you do for Carpel when you worked there?
So I showed up there, and he makes a batch of Disco Volantes, and they start selling like crazy. And he gets a good review in Mountain Bike Action. There's like that beautiful blue bike with the Hannah on the front that was on the cover of Mountain Bike Action, and it just blew up. So he begged me to come out, and I did everything from answering the phone, taking out the trash, taking the bikes to the heat treater, pick them up from the heat treater, take them to the painter, take them back from the painter, face stuff, chase stuff, put stickers on them, put them in the box, take them to the UPS store. Like I did everything other than weld bikes. But it was just like whatever odd job needed to be done at the time, wherever the bike was in its development of fabrications, I would just help out anywhere I could. Did
you work with Michael Town at all?
I sure did work with Michael Town. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that MBA cover photo, it was the blue frame with the red Hannah forks. That bike showed up for sale last year, and Mike bought it.
No way. Yeah.
Apparently that's Disco #1.
It probably was Disco #1. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. He was hanging out around there and was a pretty good rider, and he lived just up in Truckee or somewhere near up in the Sierra. So I'd go up to his place and ride, and he would come down. He would work in the frame shop too. He was working, I think, probably in that frame shop when I first showed up in Reno, and he was like cutting tubes and bolting them into the jigs and like doing stuff kind of like what I was doing as well. Yeah. And it was a fascinating experience, just learning all of the little things about frame manufacturing and heat treating. And his jig was super basic, and it was just like a T-shaped piece of aluminum, and it would flex as it heated and cooled. And he was like putting a piece of shim metal underneath the standoffs so that the jig was slightly crooked, so that when he welded it, when it cooled, it would be straight. And I was just like, well, you're welding frames crooked? Like, this is insane. But like, he was already like, this is just like how I got to do it. I'm not going to build some gazillion-dollar jig. Like, I'll just build this slightly askew, and then it will cool and it will be straight. And I'm just like, what? Can you actually? He didn't care.
It must have been a cool place to work with someone like Yan in those early days when there were so many new designs that you was playing with, and there was probably something different every day coming into his mind that he was then making and testing and trying and binning and coming on to the next thing.
Yeah, totally. He would change like this lower link like almost every batch. It would get like 1/8 of an inch longer every batch. And this one actually has, if you can see it, it's got what we just call an 8-inch direct mount. It's got the 22mm direct threaded in holes from a Hayes brake. And he had totally smoked his rear rotor on this like motorcycle hill climb that we used to hike up and bomb down. And he's just like, he was over it. He just went to his frame shop, fucking cut the dropout off, and welded on a new rear end with a better brake mount. It's like, I'm putting an 8-inch rotor on the back of my bike. And like, they literally never existed, even intense. Like, nobody had an 8-inch rotor on the back. They just thought that the rear brake would skid and all the brake force was up front. And he was like, this is stupid. He had no regard for anyone in the bike industry. He knew everybody was just a bunch of followers. No one had the balls to do what they really wanted to do. He did not care at all what people thought about that. He just did what he thought needed to be done. So he had the 8-inch rotor on the back, and then we went to Mammoth, and he flatted at the top, and he was so pissed off that he literally like drove through the night back to his house and welded up a rear end that fit a 3-inch wide tire and got a snowcat rim and a Gaslody 3.0, and was like, I'm over this. I'm not ever going to drive 10 hours to get a flat tire in the first 100 yards of a bike race again. Like this, I'm done. And so he just take matters in his own hands, and like, he'd show up to work the next morning, and he would have a rear triangle welded up with a 3-inch tire on the back, and was like polishing the rear end with like a Scotch-Brite pad. Just like, holy shit. He actually did it. Like, he stayed up all night and welded up a new swing arm and had that thing done. I was like, whoa, that was just like his driving force, was to improve, but also he was so frustrated with the pace of technology in mountain biking. It was an eye-opening experience, because I was just like, I wanted to fit in the bike industry and wanted to, I didn't want to like rub anybody raw or whatever. I wanted to fit in, and he just didn't bother him one bit to make changes right away. He just knew it would be better in the long run, so he just went for it.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it's a story that you hear a lot, whether you talk to Brent Foes or Jeff Staber or about Yan Carpel. The ideas that they had were so far ahead of the technology that was available that it took a good 6, 7, 8 years for technology to even start to catch up with what they were doing. Brent with his 6-inch LTS, and there was no fork that existed. And Jeff coming out with the suspension bikes when he did, and nothing existed then, and all of that stuff. It just shows how ahead of the curve they all were.
Yeah, it's so true. It's really interesting with Yan. He grew up in like communist Poland, and he was so separated from the rest of the world. And we're here. I'm like, I'm in Utah. You're like in California, in the UK, and seeing mountain biking basically being invented at the same time, but in different places around the world. Mm-hmm. And so when I would like say like, oh well, this bike is built this way, or can we do that? He would just look at me and be like, dude, those guys were riding rigid bikes on dirt roads, thinking they're inventing mountain biking. And when I was in my early teens, I was chopping up small motorcycles and rewelding them. And I had suspension forks and fat tires when those guys were riding rigid bikes. Just nobody knew it, because I was in Poland, and he didn't know he was inventing anything. He was just kind of having fun and progressing forward with what he had access to. And those guys were like riding down bobsled runs at the Olympic venue in Poland on these cobbed up like full suspension mountain bikes in like somewhere around like 1980 or 70s, like when he was a kid, because he's a few years my senior. And so it's just wild to think that while guys in Mount Tam were putting derailleurs on cruisers and cutting up road bikes and rewelding them and stuff so that they could get off road, that it was happening in a totally different way halfway around the world with no influence whatsoever. It's just like totally fascinating.
So I think
it is interesting.
The Disco Volante came out, I think, around 1997 is the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I think it was 98, but 98. It was probably 97 when he had the first one made. And I got mine, I think, in like the winter of 98 or spring or something.
98. I saw one of the very first ones come by the shop that I was working at in the Bay Area. And, that's when downhill was really coming, into its own, right? You had the Intensum ones, you had the Lobos, like everybody was coming up with 6 and 8-inch travel, downhill mountain bikes. And then you would see the Carpels and some of the more exotic, like back then M1s were more exotic. So like 98, 99, people were downhill racing. And then around 99, people decided that it was the jumping off cliffs, massive doubles, whatever you could do, not necessarily how fast you could get down the trail, but just how aggro you could get, started coming into fruition. And I don't know if there was a word for it yet at that point, but you were right there, right? You were doing some racing, but you got into what became Freeride, or what we now call Freeride. Wasn't there even a name for it back then?
I think we were calling it Freeride because there were people like there were like the Canadians that were doing freeride stuff, and they were riding 6-inch travel bikes that were super janky with rim brakes, and Schley and Tippy and Simmons. Those guys were free riding, but they weren't. I wouldn't ever take anything away from them because they were really like the generation 1 pioneers, but they weren't doing it really the same way that was like what was in my mind. But we were, I was in Reno, and there was like the spot, it was like an old moto zone, and we were goofing around and taking pictures and stuff. And there's this big cliff, and we would like ride down the cliff and then like off the end of it. And it was kind of like the steep little line. It was probably like a moto hill climb. And we had probably the only 11-inch travel bike that had ever been built. and we just wanted to see what it would do. And so we were like riding to the edge of this thing and riding off of it. And I was like, I'm going to just ride off of it from the top and just going to carry like 2 miles an hour faster and just hop off the top. And I sent it like off this ledge over like the knuckle all the way down to the landing. And it was like the most amazing feeling. It reminded me of just like showing up to like a 3-foot powder day and hopping off of something that normally you would be like sketchy working your way down. You're like, I'm just going to fly off it today because it's a powder day. So like every day felt like a powder day on that bike. It was insane. And that I got a picture taken there. I was on my own Carpel at the time. They ended up getting published in Bike Magazine. And that completely changed it for me because I was like, okay, cool. Like, and Yan was really excited about it. So that was a big start. And then
what was that, Armageddon or Apocalypse era?
That was Armageddon era. Yeah. And so I think I came home to Utah for like winter break, Christmas vacation or whatever. And there's this old zone here that is kind of closed now that like Shams March rode there and Richie Schley rode there with Thor Wixom back in like 97 in a couple of videos, like Outer Extremities before Down was around. And also the movie, was it called Plush? It was like Plush the movie. It was a mountain bike magazine. And he had Shams out there with his mountain cycle and I think a Handa Brink. And he was sending it off some crazy stuff. And we're like, oh, damn. So we went there and it's south facing and it happened to be like a low snow year. And so we went to that zone. I'm like, I know exactly where that is. I grew up riding my motorcycle right there. So we went there and I had a prototype Carpel with me and we just started setting it off of like every single line and just one after another. It was like, I'm going to hit this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And it was just all working. You're landing in gravel. So if you made a mistake, you could tumble off your bike. And it was just like the perfect canvas. It was so fun. So we just got like hooked on. I wasn't trying to make a career out of it. It was just like, it was just so fun. So, and just testing the equipment because the bikes could do it. So all of a sudden when you realize the bike could land it, and if you went a little faster, it actually stuck it better. It wouldn't sink in so much. You're like, oh, okay, I should just hit the other one that's actually bigger. I bet the landing will be better than the smaller drop we're hitting over here. It was just such a good time. So we were riding all that stuff, and then things didn't work out at Carpel because it was a total shit show. And I just realized that maybe I was better off coming back to Utah. So I came back to Utah and I had like a prototype. It was a disco, but it was like a 9-inch travel disco. And I had a 7-inch travel Rissy Champ on the front. And I had 24-inch 3.0 tires on it. And that was like insane. And you could just land in the soft dirt, like no problem. So we just started getting after it there. And through a photographer friend of mine, I was talking about Gordy Pfeiffer early on. He was a extreme skier, one of the best in the world. He had transitioned into photography. He learned everything from the ski industry, and through some injuries and stuff, he got really into photography. So he was like taking photos, and he was shooting photos with Thor Wixom when they were shooting some video. And Thor asked Gordy, hey, do you know anybody like local that we could shoot with so we don't have to like find people in Canada and bring them here or whatever? And he's like, actually, yeah, I have like a pack of friends that are getting after it. And he's like, well, give me their number. So I got a phone call from Thor Wixom, and it was like Christmas Day for me, like the biggest day of my life. Like I was trying so hard to keep my shit together. And so my buddy, Doug Gormley, was like my best friend at the time. We traveled to all the bike races. He was all in, and he had a Carpel Disco Volante 9-inch travel with a Rissy Champ, and his was black with a lime green rear end on it. And he had like a black and green Fox kit. And I had this red and silver bike with like a red kit. And we showed up like all dressed up, like with our game faces on. And we were freaking out under our helmets, but we were trying so hard to keep it cool. And Thor's there, and he's got like that 16mm camera. And the second you hear that thing whirring, you know that like it's on, because he's spending money to be there if he's running that camera. This was like supposed to be an audition, but if he's got that camera out, like we're going for it. And we sent every single line there, and were just hitting him stuff bigger and faster than we ever had. And he was like being all like Mr. Cool, and we were like trying to be cool about it. And we went through this whole shoot. And I think that we left and we were just like freaking out in the truck on the drive home. And then kind of find out that Thor and his buddies were like freaking out on the drive home. Also like, that was so amazing. Holy crap. We got all this insane footage. Like, wow, what are we going to do next? And from there, it was every weekend we were traveling to a different spot. And Thor grew up in Utah, traveling around, probably hunting and camping with his family. And he knew all of these like random zones. So we would just like drive down the highway and go down a dirt road because we could see something miles off in the distance. Just like, that looks like a cool rock formation. Let's go check it out. And we would just like go and poach stuff, hopping barbed wire fences, riding lines. And we spent our whole summer just traveling around, hitting everything we could find. And it was just like the most amazing summer of my life.
Was that the first down video, or what?
Yeah.
What video was that?
So that was filming for Down. Yep.
And you were in at least 2 of them. Were you in all 3 of them?
I was in the first 3. Yeah, we did the 3 together. Yeah. The Down video, I'm not sure if he knew what direction he was going, but he was an amazing artist. And I didn't even quite understand his vision at the time, because he had been shooting like a little bit of racing and a little bit of free ride and a little bit of urban, like in the movie Outer Extremities. I don't know if you remember that. That's the one that Shams was in. And it was really good, but it was a mix of all kinds of things. It was just like a jumbled, it was like reading a magazine, like one page, it's downhill. The next page, it's free ride. So he had this vision of just to go all free ride all the time if he had the right talent and the right locations. And so we started shooting, and he was a religious person. And I grew up in the religious world, but I'm not really a religious person, but I reached a point where I'm like, dude, is this going to work out? Because we're spending all of our time and money doing this. And like, it is super dangerous. And like, I can't keep my bike together, going through shocks every weekend and wheels. And he just looked me straight in the eye and said, dude, you just have to have faith in me that this is going to work out. Because, we're shooting on film. So you don't even get to see the footage for like a half a year. And he would send it in to get developed. There was no like digital backup camera, nothing. It was all shot on 60 millimeter film. And so he convinced me just to like be all in, and we just kept traveling around and shooting these lines. And it just started to really click with me. And sometimes it would be just the 2 of us, literally just 2 people. We would be hiking a ridge line for half a day and waiting for the sun to come out and getting like that one clip. And you'd spend a whole weekend and you'd have trash suspension and you'd be hammered and dirty, and you'd have like 10 seconds of footage that you had captured that weekend. And so it became like really difficult mentally to make it to the end of the summer. Yeah. But we got like this momentum, and he got this feeling of what I thought I wanted to do, and he was all about it. Because I was like, I wanted to do a line one time that no one had ever done. And I didn't want to have a track on it. I didn't want any footprints on it. I wanted it to look like a Warren Miller ski movie where you're getting first tracks on a first ascent. And I wanted to stick it the first time, and I didn't want to have to hike back up and do it again. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. I was pretty frightened. So I wanted to only do it once. And it pushed me to get into a mindset that like is really difficult to replicate anywhere outside of like the highest level of competition, where you're sitting up there and you're like, I committed to this. I hiked my bike up the hill. There's 2 cameramen down there. We've spent the whole weekend on this. We built the jump. The sun is out. Like, it's time to go. Yeah. And it's like there's the cloud in the sky, and the cloud moves and the sun is out, and you're like, fuck, okay, I'm going to give it the 3, 2, 1. And it's like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is insane. And you just like right up to the drop, and you realize like, if you tap your brakes, something very bad is going to happen. You have to like hit the line and hit that landing and roll out of the frame. Otherwise you're going to tomahawk. And I just like, something clicked out of the pressure, and I wanted it so badly that I rode in ways I never had the own confidence of myself to do. And it was the pushing of Thor and his crew and the positive vibes of everyone that we were traveling with, which was a very small crew of a handful of people, and just was sticking these lines. And Thor would just be like, throw his hands up in the air, like, I can't believe you just pulled that line. I can't believe. And I was like, did you get that shot? He's like, I got it. I was like, are you sure you guys, I got it. I was like, good, let's get out of here. I'm not going back up there again. And we did that like every day off I had all summer long into the winter. And it was just like every time we would just get like the one magic clip. It was like a magical experience that I'll never forget.
Let's talk about
So you obviously, sorry, Chuck.
I want to talk about your mindset for a little bit. You haven't seen it yet. We haven't released it yet. We recorded with Nathan Rennie just before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And up until recently, he held the world record for the longest jump on a mountain bike, 120 something feet. He was being towed in at 96 kph, which is 60 miles an hour, hitting a ramp and, you know, just going for it and crashing repeatedly. And he finally broke his bike and had to call it a day. And Jamie asked the question, how do you do that? In so many words, he used more colorful terminology than I do. And Nathan's basically like, you just have to suck it up. So like, are you able to actually control your fear? Do you have the fear and you do it anyway? What is your mindset? You know, because I have racing experience where I've crashed so bad in the middle of a race that, dude, my psychology changes. And like the fear actually goes away and you go into this instinctual kind of mindset. But that's what happened for me. What was it like for you?
Yeah. I can kind of see it in two ways. In the back of my mind, I was still just like this little kid out riding and scared. And then I think because I had managed to pull it off one time, mostly just because of so much excited energy, that you stick something and it goes right. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like that worked. But there's like, there's always a phrase where like, what is it? You kind of make your own luck. Like luck is a mix of preparation meets opportunity. So, and I think that getting lucky is really, it's about building confidence. So, you know, you get a bike, you get the suspension dialed in, you spend hundreds of hours hiking ridge lines and riding it and trying to get your brakes to work, and you've got everything dialed in, and you finally get it really honed, and you've ridden it so much and you've got it so dialed and you've hit the jump 100 times that like you build that confidence and you know you can do it. But then when you're trying to do it in front of a crowd, it's so terrifying. But I think I forced myself into a position where I had no out, because the film crew was there, they were set up, I was dressed, ready to go. I knew my bike was prepped. I had spent countless hours getting it all running right. Showing up with like 3 rear shocks. You got the best one of the 3 on your bike. It's good for like one more run. And you're like, this is it. Like it's now or never. You could bow out, but like I wanted it so badly. And it did take a long time for me to build that confidence of like working out and then going to a new location and being terrified all over again. And then having the people that had seen me ride the weekend before and be like, dude, this is just like that line you did last week. It's a different dirt, but it's the same size drop. It's the same run out. It's the same speed. Like you nailed it last time, you can nail it again. I was like, all right, you're right. Okay, let's do this. And so it was a bit of a process, but I think that I spent a lot of time focusing and a lot of running through my head of what it would feel like as you roll up to the drop. And a lot of that stuff was like a blind drop. So it really had to be in your head. You couldn't see the landing. You couldn't see the camera people. All you could see was like a sandstone cliff and like the horizon. And again of exactly what I'm going to do on my bike, the position I'm going to be in, knowing I'm going to be in the right gear, the speed I'm going to roll up to it, just knowing that like I've checked all of the boxes. It's just my turn to just like link it up. And it's just my opportunity to make it happen. I put all the preparation in. I think if I was doing something that I wasn't prepared for, it might sound crazy, but it's like, sometimes I don't really feel like a risk taker. I feel like I'm really calculated. So if I just rolled up to something that I'd never seen before, I probably wouldn't hit it. But if I had spent 2 days building the line, sleeping on it, waking up in the morning, thinking about, okay, I was thinking about coming in this speed, but now I'm thinking about coming in this speed. I mean, I would like sit on the edge of the cliff and like literally like throw rocks off of the cliff onto the landing. Sorry, the phone's ringing. And just watching the rock like fall onto the dirt. and think like, okay, that's my trajectory. And we would just like throw pebbles off until something in my mind clicked that I could envision my bike doing the same thing. And you just like roll up the hill and be like, okay, I'm going to roll at this speed. And I'm telling myself, I know what the landing looks like. It's 18 feet away. I'm going to land in this little spot right here. And then I'm going to coast down and I'm going to grab my brakes over here and I'm going to stop over here. And I just had it all broken down into every little step of the way. So it didn't feel like a stunt at all. It felt like a very calculated risk that I was willing to take because I felt like I'd done the preparation. That's the only way that I pull it off.
You must have ridden quite a lot with Josh Bender over the years. And there's a lot of stuff that you've done that, I mean, I've ridden downhill, I've raced downhill for years, but there's a lot of stuff that I've seen what you've done and I'm out. I'm not doing it. What was that like when you saw the likes of Josh come in and just take it? I mean, he took it to extreme levels, 50, 60 foot drops. Right. I mean, there's a I don't know if that's balls or what it is, but
yeah, that's a long story. So we had filmed, oh man, we had only filmed a little bit of down, like a couple months worth. We had a couple clips and we were on our way. And we got like these photos sent to us of Josh because he rode with this dude, Simeon, who was a photographer. And Simeon was like Bender's hype man. And so he had sent us photos of this crazy cliff drop that he had nailed in Ashland, Oregon. And Bender's like a total gypsy, like homeless nomad. He just was like he was in Oregon via Alaska, and that's just like where they were. So they're sending us these pictures of this drop that he had hit. And it seemed like, I wouldn't say impossible, but it seemed like hard to fathom just looking at a picture. And so we got on like on a phone call with them and we got him to come down to Utah. He came down to Utah and he like lived at my house for about a week or so, maybe 3 weeks as we were riding around in Utah a bit. And he was a completely different kind of risk taker and person than I was. I would say he was more of a stuntman. And he had what he thought was a calculated risk, but if he was there, he was going to hit it no matter what. There was no like maybe not. So he had made the plans of like what to do and how he was going to hit it. But if it wasn't working out right, like he was going to do it anyway. And he was just kind of like hope it was going to work out or try to modify. But he'd had something in his brain that was completely different than me or anyone I had ever met before. And it was just like a light switch and he was going, period. And it was a really hard thing to be around because I would spend so much time trying to get something just right. And he would just want to go for it. And he would just like, he'd roll up to a drop and maybe going off of intuition, but instead of like rolling up to the edge of the drop and hitting it, he would just like pick up and like hop like above the drop. I don't know if he just like felt like the angle, like as you're rolling up to something, that was the place to like take off or what. And he would end up like taking off from like 8 feet higher than where he had planned on hopping and then missing the landing. Like we'd groom a big old landing like 8 feet wide and he would miss it completely and then just like tomahawk. And it was like, it felt extremely dangerous to me. And
hard to be around.
Really hard to be around. It was extremely difficult to be around. And I only made it around for like a couple of trips with him before we ended up having to separate and doing the film on like different weekends and things because the vibe was totally different. And Thor was kind of hyping it too because he was just like along for the ride. Like he couldn't say no. And if Bender was like saying yes, then Thor was going to film it. But it was super dangerous and terrifying. And if anybody told him like, hey dude, I don't think this is a smart move, he would go ballistic. So he could not tolerate anybody around him that was negative at all. Even if you like didn't think it was going to work or you were afraid for someone's life, you're better off just to leave. He didn't want you around at all. So he only wanted people that could be in his court and hype him up. And that was exactly what he needed. but the kid is incredibly strong, stout person who is super fit and totally prepared. So the first time you see him crash, you're like, oh, dude, that was like a life-altering injury. Like, I can't believe we just saw that. Like, you're just sitting there going, okay, where's the hospital? How are we going to get him out of here? And then he would just like pop up. Visor would be broken off, forks bent, like he would be fine. And it would just take you down this mental journey of, I thought we were going to the hospital. I thought we were going to evacuate this dude. I'm thinking of like where we're going to land a helicopter. How's an ambulance going to get here? And he's popped up and he's just like down at the bottom, like screwing on another pair of forks, and he's like ready to go again. And it was mentally exhausting for me and my friend crew. And there was this zone that in Virgin where he was going to hit this little drop that led to another drop that led to another drop. But they're like 10-foot cliffs. So they're not like the biggest thing ever. But if you made a mistake on one, you know, it was not good all the way down. And there's like a ditch at the bottom 100 feet away. You know, there's no exit plan. And he was just like, I'm going to hit this one and then this one and this one. And we named the zone Tiddlywinks because we're just like, we're going to go back to camp and play Tiddlywinks because like we are not down for this like at all. And for him, there was no hesitation at all. He just saw the line he wanted to do, and he didn't see any of the dangers around it. He was completely focused on just what he was doing. And the amount of focus he had it was inspirational and terrifying at the same time, because you would see him make a mistake. And then I would see him like, dude, you don't have enough speed for that. You need to be going way faster, or you need to slow down, or what are you going to do over here? Or dude, your shock is blown. Like, let's go back and get it fixed. And he's like, I'm sending it. We're here. I'm like, I'm going. Like, either you're with me or you're against me. So if you're not here to stoke me out, like literally get out of here. And he was yelling at people like, get out. So he kind of developed his own crazy friend group, you know, and this was also like the time of like the motorcycle videos, like the Crusty Demons of Dirt, and freestyle motocross was a thing. And it was very much like, he was like a freestyle motocross dude. Like, he was out there to get the job done no matter what. If the bike was going to break, it was not a problem. That was not a concern of his. He was there just to do whatever he could. And it was a completely different mindset. And it was, I mean, it was something to behold, but it was absolutely terrifying.
So, dude, something I didn't know about you, for a little backstory, you know, I ran into you at Interbike a long time ago when you had your red Armageddon and you had like a red Sparkle WTB SST saddle on your bike. So your bike was at the WTB booth for a little bit. So I've known you for a little bit, but I didn't know until recently that, one, you were the first rider in the first Redbull Rampage ever. And then two, you know, leading up to this conversation today, I was like, well, how did you get there? What was the backstory behind the first Redbull? Because it never happened before. So how did you get there? How did the whole thing come about?
Yeah, so that story starts, so we have to back up a little bit till that first summer of filming Down. Yeah. So so Thor would call around to bike shops around the state, trying to see if like he could get any kind of accommodation or any help or scouting or anything we could get. And also trying to find like awesome spots to ride. So he somehow had gotten a hold of this dude, Dean Williams, who ran a shop down in just outside of Virgin in Springdale, just outside of the national park there.
So I know Dean from Bike Zion. I don't think that shop is
Bike Zion. Yeah, outside of Zion National Park. And he was trying to promote his bike shop. And he had also built a bunch of really famous trails. Like, he had laid out Gooseberry Mesa and built a lot of legit bike trails, and also gotten himself into trouble with all of the local municipalities and landowners and park rangers and everybody else. And he lived in the town of Virgin, which is like a couple hundred people. It's like a couple streets. And was a total like outlaw down there. So anyway, he's like, hey, you should come down to this zone. I have all these amazing places to ride. And we're like, all right. So Thor and I like load up, and I got like my big crazy like 9-inch travel bike, and it's like 48 pounds. And we went out to Gooseberry Mesa, and he's looking at like, there's like caves, and we're like hitting drops off of caves, and we're looking at cool stuff, but it wasn't quite clicking. And he didn't quite get it either. And so we didn't really get any shots that weekend. And it is the craziest thing to look back on. It's like, I was looking around at all of the cliffs and all the ridge lines, but somehow I didn't see it. It almost looked too big and too far away, and I didn't even know what I was looking at. It didn't click for me or for Thor. And you know, sometimes when you're like 10 miles away from something, you can't tell if the cliffs are 100 feet tall or rideable, or how you'd even get out there, if you could drive out there. So we were just clueless. So anyway, we left kind of like, yeah, whatever. And Dean's like a very high energy driven individual. And he was like, damn it, like that didn't work out. What's the deal? So we were down filming in an undisclosed location in southern Utah, totally poaching like a state park.
Mhm.
And there's like red hoodoos and cliff walls with this beautiful red shale. And there's also pine trees up there and a perfect blue sky. It was like the most amazing spot to shoot video. And so I had found this killer little like cliff drop that landed in a chute of shale. It was just so picturesque and perfect. And so we're up there shooting, and lo and behold, out of nowhere, and this is like before cell phones, like Dean just like shows up on foot. He had heard that we were there on location, and he found us and hiked in and found us. He's just like driven. So anyway, I'll speed up a little bit. He sees like the line that I hit, and his eyes are bugging out his head. And he's like, dude, you got to come back to Virgin. I know exactly where to take you. I get it. I didn't realize what you guys were looking for, and I had no idea what you guys were doing. I hit like a 40-foot drop or something in this little chute, and it was like so sweet. And so he was like, would not leave us alone. So we were like, all right, cool, we'll come back down again. And then like we go to the town of Virgin, and the next thing we drive up to where the original Rampage was. We call it the old site. And it is like a mile away from his house. It is up the road. It is not far at all. And we're just looking around. We're like, oh, damn. Yeah, there's like a steep ridge to a 10-foot cliff to like landing on a ridge to another one. It's like white and red, and there's boulders. It was just beautiful. So we shot a bunch of cool stuff there, and it worked out awesome. And he was ecstatic about it. So then we go home, and then we have the whole meeting with Bender, and Bender comes down, is like living at my house, and we take him to Virgin, and he sees Virgin, and he goes bonkers. He's like sending it off of everything in sight. And he's so into it. And he and Dean are a very similar kind of individual. And he just stayed at Dean's house. So we drove back to Salt Lake, and he just stayed there. I'm like, you're not? He's like, I'm staying. I'm just staying here with Dean. And he lived in Dean's, like in a tough shed in his backyard that summer. It's like 110 degrees. Like no fucks given. That's all he wanted to do. And I was like, all right, dude. And so Thor was like going back every weekend to film with Bender, and we were going down and shooting all this stuff. So that whole zone was like just so perfect. There's 100 lines in a row. Like there's stuff that we shot in down that like I can't even find, because they all look the same. Like, is this the same ridge? Like, God, it looks the same, but it's all amazing. So the movie Down goes off, and everyone finds out about Virgin, and he manages to get like some Canadian freeriders to come down, like even later that same year that we had ridden there, and it became like a zone. And then by 2001, he had managed to finagle someone that he knew at Redbull or a Rebel athlete, put him in touch with the right person. And
You're talking about Thor at this point?
Talking about Dean.
Oh, Dean.
About Dean, yeah. So Dean managed to get backing from Redbull to put on a freeride contest, because he was just trying to blow up his spot the best way possible. And so I remember when Dean called me, he's like, dude, I got like a permit, and I've got backing from Redbull, and we're going to have a freeride contest here. I was like, all right, damn.
Had the Moab freeride contest already taken place?
Yeah, so the Moab freeride contest happened in 2000. So we shot Down in 99 and Double Down in 2000. And during the summer of 2000, there was a bike race in Moab that was on the Moab rim, where there was a chairlift that went straight up the cliff. It was the best spot, but it was so scary to ride the lift that like he couldn't even get people to come as sightseers and keep the lift open, because it was terrifying even to go up there. So anyway, the Ron Lindley, Ron and Bronwyn that run the Utah Gravity Series had an idea to put on a freeride contest. And they grew up in the ski world. They work at ski resorts and stuff. And I don't know where he got the idea to have a contest, but we were on the Moab Rim, and we were just up there free riding for fun all the time. And the race course was gnarly. It was a Jeep hill climb, totally unforgiving, extremely dangerous. But there was just like this huge zone where it was like a big bowl of sandstone that funneled down from water into this gully with multiple drops and ledges. And he had put a contest together, and there was like multiple sections, and he had judges at each section. It was like 5 sections, and you had a judge at each one, and he would judge like this one particular section, and then he would add up like the tally at the bottom. And I had my Armageddon. And once I got that Armageddon, I was like, I want to go back and hit every drop and every line I've ever ridden all over again on this bike. Like, I just wanted to hit rewind because the bike was so incredible at what it could do. It was so composed that like everything just seemed like a video game. So he laid out the contest, and there was this flat drop into this like sandstone wash. And it was a brutal drop. It was like, I don't know, like 8 or 10 feet high to flat. It was harsh, like people breaking their crank spindles and stuff. And there was like V lines around it. And as soon as you landed, there was like another drop, a double drop after it of like a rock waterfall. And Lance Canfield was there, and he was totally firing on all cylinders at this time. And he had big travel bikes, and we were pushing each other a ton at the time. And he was an extremely talented free rider and still is a great mountain biker to this day. And then we had a few of our buddies, and then there was like some Canadian dudes that were on a film trip that were down there, but they weren't really, I don't know if they maybe didn't quite have the bikes set up for it. And they just hadn't had all the years of experience of riding sandstone. And like my bike had 11 inches of travel. And I think that Lance had like a 10-inch travel bike or a 12-inch travel bike. And we were hitting this flat drop, and most people didn't even want to hit the drop. And we're looking at it, and right before we go up to go to the start, I eyeball this double drop, and I said, I'm going to double that. And everyone's like, wait, we got to look at it again. Like, wait, you're going to do what? I was like, I'm going to double that drop. And I'd never hit it. So we went up and we rode the line, and I hit the flat drop, and I just sent it over the first drop, and I tapped my rear wheel on the second drop, kind of on purpose, and then hit the landing. And it was like, it was epic. And I just pulled it off. And a couple people were like, yeah, but you kind of hit your wheel on that landing. What I kind of did on purpose. So I went back up, and it was like a 2-run format. So I went up and I did it again, and I cleared the second drop the second time and landed it perfectly and ended up winning the contest. And it was like totally awesome. It was really fun. There was only like, 15 people competing or something. It was not that big of a deal at the time, but we had no idea that we were like making history. We were just like doing this contest for fun while we were at a downhill race. It just seemed like a good time.
So basically the first free ride competition in history, kind of, that we know of.
I think so. I think it was the first one ever. Yeah, and it was in a perfect location because there was line choice, and there was judging, and there was room for freedom of expression on the course, and it had all the vibes of like what Rampage was like, totally. So Rampage was sort of like came off of that a little bit. I mean, it's also very much like a ski comp. So it's not like no one had ever done a judged extreme contest on a mountain before. It was very much like skiing, but it was the first of its kind. And so Rampage coming around was like a bigger version of that on a more built out level with the much wider variety of participants.
Okay, cool. Now back to Rampage and Dean getting Red Bull backing. So what was it like? You, Dean, Bender, like who put together the first Rampage?
Yeah, so Dean really put it together, but he tasked me with the opportunity of my contribution was to put together the athlete roster. And so I was really into racing, and I was watching every video I could get my hands on, every DVD or every VHS tape. So of course it's like me and Bender and Lance Canfield and a few of my homies from the Utah area, and some mountain bike racers from Colorado that had been free riding with us a bunch out in Moab. And then I try to think of every dude that was ever at a big national or World Cup race that was like hitting a jump for fun. There's always somebody that's like at the slalom that's like trying to hit a jump and like shortcut the course and land in a berm or something like that, and like raising money for the crowd. Like, so those kinds of people in the World Cup racing world I had invited, but a lot of them were like European. So there were only a few that showed up, but there was also a big contingent of British Columbia riders. So like Gareth Dyer, and of course, like all of the Rocky Mountain free riders, and man, I wish I could think of all the names, just a host of everyone that was doing videos at the time. We invited all of those dudes, and like 25 people showed up. And we invited Kyle Strait because he was winning dirt jump contests all over the place. And I had seen him at downhill races, and he had an intense M1. So, and there was a dirt jump contest also at the same time. And so he was only 14, and his dad was like, well, you know, if the contest is too gnarly, then you could just do like the dirt jump contest. And his dad was super cool. I remember he had like multiple sets of spring rates for the M1, thinking that he might need like a stiffer spring, but discovering that you needed like a soft enough setup to keep the bike composed on the steeps. And he was just totally killing it. It was a trip because like I rolled up to the sign up that morning, and I had like camped literally like in the parking lot, just like in the back of my truck. So I was the first person to roll up to sign up because I had literally camped on site. And I was so naive about like the whole world of Red Bull and Freeride that like I was stoked that there was no entry fee because I was so broke. I was like, how much is this going to cost? Is it like $200 to enter or something? Like, I don't know. Like I could barely afford gas money. And the fact that it was free blew my mind. I was like, this is so cool. Like it's free. Like we were invited to be here and we don't even have to pay. Like that's amazing. There were more cameramen than there were riders for sure. And so I got the #1 plate just because I simply was the first person to roll up to sign up, and I got the plate, and then I'm holding this plate with a 1 on it. I was like, oh shit, this is not good. This means I'm the first person that has to go. I was like, what am I doing? I should have like hung back and waited for somebody else, but I just didn't even think about it. And they were just like, yeah, take it, you know, take the plate, like go put it on your bike. And I had the most experience riding there. So I was like, all right, I'll go first. That's all good. But it was like, it's hard at a judged contest to be the first person to go because like, how are you trying to gain criteria? So they have to establish the criteria from somewhere. And so I think it was kind of a hard event to judge, and judged events were so new. And that was a bit challenging on my part, but that's just part of being in a contest, right?
Yeah. Was that like a multi-run format, or were you one and done?
You did a 2-run format. Yep. Which a lot of people would like slide out or crash or whatever. So it was great to be able to get 2 runs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if there was one opportunity I could go back and like do it all over again, man, you know, just hindsight's 2020, but they had built like a course. So they had like some flags, and they had a line that was kind of ridden in. But there was just like this big area, and there was a line down the middle, and you could kind of go wherever you wanted, but you know, it's only like you had a day of practice. You didn't know what to do or where to go and like what the judges could see. And so I was just kind of riding the main line and like a little variation of the main line. Miles Rockwell was there because he's an insane, wacky free rider dude at the same time. Mm-hmm. And he and I had chosen the same line, which was like an offshoot of the main line that went down a steep kind of double drop into a gully, which was really rad. But he rode it better than I did. So, you know, he got a better score on that line than I did. But the Canadians, just being the kind of humans that they are and being so creative and like so happy-go-lucky and chill, they had like a whole pack of like, you know, the Fro riders, which is at least 3 of them, plus a handful of other dudes. And they all made a camping trip out of it. So it seemed like there was like 10 or 15 Canadians there. Mm-hmm. And they just did their own thing. And they're like, well, everyone's riding over there. Look at this sweet line over here as we're hiking up. There's like another ridge. And they built their own line. I was like, oh my God.
Didn't they call it like Canadian bacon or something?
Yeah. So it was called the Canadian line. And the Canadians all rode this other side. It was like, dude, these guys, like, they have their own like line over here. It's like, shit, man, I wish I had my own line. Because I like, you know how I was saying, like with my own filming, I wanted to have like a virgin run with no tire tracks on it. And to be at a contest where there's like all these people, there wasn't really space to do the kind of creative riding that I like to do. So it felt a little bit more like is this a race run or is this like, what is this? So it didn't quite click for me in the way that like to have a chance to look around and would have built my own line with my own buddies, you know, like we could have, it just didn't happen that way. And so the Canadians built this Canadian line, and then there was this fat drop to a nice landing at the bottom. They called it Canadian Bacon. And Wade Simmons hit that line perfectly. And it was like no one else really eyed it up. And he won the contest. He actually crashed in his run, but still hit this Canadian Bacon drop. And it was like the sickest thing that happened at the contest. And he won the contest. And I was like, damn, dude, that was nice work, guys. Like, way to show up and like just do it your own way. And those guys, none of them were racers. None of them had been there before. So they didn't have any influence. They were just like, they're all skiers, you know, and they've been on helicopters and done their own lines and skiing. And so I think they're just like, well, why don't we, let's ride. This looks fun. Let's just ride this. And then just like history was made.
That sounds interesting. Would have loved to have been there.
Yeah, it was something else.
When was that? 2001?
It was in 2001. Yeah.
Yeah. In the fall or?
In the fall, yeah.
Yeah, it's always like in October now, I think.
Yeah, the weather's really good there. And it was kind of at the end of the race season. You can get people to come try it out. Yeah.
Now, I heard a rumor, Kris, that you're somewhat of a bike geek and collector, probably much like myself. So what have you got going on there in the background? I can't quite make some of them out, the frames.
Well, so a couple of bikes I brought that I thought would be kind of fun would be, this is a Turner DHR resto mod. So it's like a 2009 Turner DHR that I think I saw a couple people on the net building up some sick old bikes, and it just got like this wild hair to build something that was rideable. So I spent a couple of years trying to find like something that I thought would actually be fun to ride. Because, you know, the old bikes, I love to look at them and collect them, but riding them is like something else, you know? So the DHR was an amazing performer at its time and been kind of friends with David Turner a little bit. So I found this frame in pretty good shape. I bought it on Pink Bike for $1,000 for the whole bike. It has a 2011 Marzocchi 888 on it, which has enough room for a 3-inch wide Gazzotti tire, which also fits a 27.5 front wheel. So I decided after building it and riding it around a little bit that I'd try to take it into a resto mod. So I built it with a 27.5 front wheel and some wider bars and modern brakes. So for the minimum of what you need to do to make it like safe to ride. And then I'm a big fan of Cane Creek double barrel shocks. So it's got a double barrel on it that I had tuned, and then 26-inch rear wheel. So it's like a mini mullet. And for the Turner aficionados out there, this particular model they call it the round tube DHR, this particular bike, the geometry was totally on point for the time, but the bottom bracket was kind of high and the head angle was a little bit steep for like where the industry was going, but you couldn't really just like sell a bike like that. So the World Cup team all would drill a hole in the frame and lower the rear end of the bike. And the Turner would come out of the box with like the groove made for the hole to be there, but you had to drill the hole yourself. And then you had to like cut the tab of the frame down for the clearance. So once you cut it down, like you couldn't really go back. So of course I drilled it and lowered it. And so between the mixed wheels and the lower rear end, the geometry is pretty good. It's a really fun bike to ride. So I built it and rode it a bunch, and I had a goal of trying to like get a halfway decent race result on it. So it took me like a handful of races to get a decent result on it and get used to how the bike rides, because the geometry is so different than today. And it's a medium. Like I'm a super small guy. I'm like 5'3", but the medium is so small. I'm so glad I didn't get a small. I had like a small square tube DHR that I was trying to get. I had like Maxxis team stickers on it. I was trying to get off this dude off a Pink Bike, but like he never could like get it together to ship it. I'm so glad I didn't get the small. So yeah, that's a really fun bike. I still ride it once in a while, and it was a really fun kind of project bike. Yeah.
You got a collection beyond just those two. I mean, looks like the whole room is littered with vintage bikes.
Yeah, I've got a collection of frames of some stuff that kind of came my way and some stuff that I
know you have at least one boulder.
I'd have at least one boulder. Yes, we have. We've done a little trading on the old Facebook Marketplace. Yeah. So some stuff that like I wish I never would have sold that I tried to get a hold of again. and then things that I just always thought were super trick that I just would love to have. And so I've got about 40 frames hanging in this bike shop that are just like fun little keepsake pieces. I really enjoy seeing an older dude like us, like roll into the bike shop, whether they work in the industry or whatever, and they see one frame and like it sticks out to them. And they're like, they tell you a story about one particular bike. And so it's fun to have like the variety of frames and see what it is that connects someone's mind with their history of like where they were, the bike that influenced them, a bike that they had, or a bike that their buddy had, or the bike that got them.
I had a guy, I had a Syntesi Bromont up on the wall, one of the original, the bronze colored ones. And this was probably 3-4 years ago. I had a guy come in store and I checked to see if he was all right. He was just stood fixated on it. And he said, yeah, I'm fine. And after a couple of minutes, he was still stood there looking at this bike on the wall. And I went back to him, you know, just double check. And when he turned around, he had tears in his eyes.
Oh, man.
And I was like, oh, okay, this is awkward. And he told me the story about how he was a British guy and he worked in this, in a bike shop for an entire year. And they basically, he was working towards this Bromont, which he worked off. He got his driving license and he went touring around Europe for like 2.5 years in a camper van. It was on the back of his van. He never locked it up, rode it everywhere. And he came back to the UK one New Year's Eve. And that night it was stolen off the back of his truck. And he walked in, not expecting to see it. And he just saw it. And he said it was just like a complete rush of emotion came back to him. And yeah, I'd never seen anybody get emotional like that over a bike. And that's kind of when you realize that they are a special thing to people. Yeah. And you know, there are some bikes out there that mean a lot. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's unusual to see it. But I mean, I've got probably, I think last count was 150, 160 bikes plus about another 60 frames.
Dude.
Wow.
It's a problem. I'm saying on the podcast, I have a problem. Don't sell me anything, do please. But yeah.
So what is it? What do you guys think that is? I mean, we have like so many people that just geek out on old bikes. And like, Kris, you just joined the group again yesterday. Thank you for joining. But like I posted up a couple days ago that I just bought a 1998 GT LTS 1000 and I wrote the story. Like I remember the very first time I rode that bike, which trail, which corner, that I got like so freaking sideways, crossed up, and then like straightened it out and yelled out like, and I'll never forget that bike. And so for me, I have like an emotional connection to that bike. And one popped up in a size 20-inch because I'm 6'3", and I had to have it because I have that emotional connection to that bike. Is that what's going on? Or are we like, is that the story behind Vintage Bike Geeks?
So, you know, I think that the bicycle is a really unique opportunity because there's only a couple of generations of humans like alive that have gone through the history of mountain biking because it's only like 2 generations old. So, I mean, like this bike here was built in like 1978. It was like among the first ever mountain bikes. So yeah, if you were growing up in that era, you know, it was literally being invented at the time. So there are things that take you back to your childhood, like some cool car that somebody had or whatever you sit in. But when the sport was actually developing while you were alive in your youth, I think it had even more profound impact because you're thumbing through mountain bike action, like in the back of math class in high school, and you see foes and it never existed before. And you're just like, whoa, like I love mountain biking. I had no idea something like that could even exist. Like, where could I take that? Who buys those? Where's that made? You know, it just opens up your imagination. It takes you right back to that time when you saw something for the first time. And I think that so many of us were like in your teens or 20s or whatever, when some of this stuff was happening, you know, like Sean Palmer busts onto the scene and like rewrites the whole story, and he's beating people that are in skin suits and he's on flat pedals. And And everybody I know went out and bought a pair of bear trap pedals and like a pair of moto pants, like the whole industry was completely changing almost every year. And it was such a profound time that will never really happen again. Well, it will never
I think
happen.
it's one of the best ways of seeing it is you only have to look at like a brand like GT, which was so prominent in the mid 90s to 2000, and they had the RTS, the LTS, the STS, Lobos, into XCRs, DHIs. There were so many bikes, and it was every 18 months, there was a completely different suspension platform, wildly different from the one before it. And that was just 5 bikes in a 5-year window. And you just don't get that now. And I think that's where, certainly for me, where it comes from, because every bike was different. There was just, everybody tried everything and anything just to try and get that edge. And that's what I like is all the different suspension designs you get out there.
Do either you have a top?
The moment when you saw a bike like this?
Dude.
Yeah.
Everything was a 4-bar link walking beam, and you see something with a moto link and twin top tubes with the shock reservoir hiding inside the frame, and like triangulation everywhere and gussets. You're like, oh, the sport has changed.
My buddy had exactly the same one.
I remember the exact moment I saw that bike. Right.
Exactly.
Like, I remember the moment. I remember talking to Dave. I remember he told me it was going to be a Javelin, and then it comes out and it's a DHR. But like, that's one of those memories. Like, that 5-minute imprint on my memory will never go away.
Never change. Right. And like the design influence of something that looked moto or had no provision for a front derailleur and never would. You're just like, can you even do that? Like, is that legal? Can you make a bike without a front derailleur now? Hey, we can do that. It just would open your mind for imagination to think in ways that you had never thought before. And you see one thing, and some frame designers saw the Javelin, and who knows what they made 5 years later. Their mind was open to like, oh, they're doing that. We could do this. I've been thinking about this, but like, that gets shot down every time we talk about it. But now everyone's like, oh, we need to do something like that. So it was just a time that it was the same way with motorcycles in like the 1970s. That is one generation before me, like that was my dad's life of getting a motorcycle with 4 inches of travel, and then getting a motorcycle with 8 inches of travel, and getting a motorcycle with 12 inches of travel, all within his high school years. Like the whole world completely changed, and the tracks changed, and the industry changed, and it's been the same for another like 40 years since then. And it basically it minimally changed since. So we were in that time frame where we saw all of that. When you show up to Big Bear and there are 100 M1s, you're like, holy shit, there are 100 M1s here. Like, whoa, I had no idea. Like, I didn't think anybody would buy one of those. Aren't those $2,400 frames? Like, but once you see it and then you go home and you're like, I'm saving up for an M1. That it just so
do either of you have like a top 1 or 2 bikes that are like you have that emotional connection to?
Oh yeah, I'll let you go first. I have a few. I have to think about that.
For me,
I think it's a difficult one to get out there, because some of them are just iconic bikes, iconic designs. Some of them even predate when I was riding. So like the Foes LTS that I got off of you, Chuck, with the hole in the front end. That's a proper iconic bike. It looks like a Fender Stratocaster.
Totally.
The 2-piece monocoque front triangle. I mean, they didn't make many of them. It's a legendary bike in terms of mountain bike, the first 6-inch travel bike. Or you'd have, I guess, when I was 16 or something like that, and you go in the local shop and the STS Lobo was there, and it just was a stunning bike. And even today, it's just a piece of art with its CNC machine girder style linkage, polished with the thermoplastic. Just bikes like that are just they're probably my 2 favorites.
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I didn't pull one off the wall, but I have like a little bit of a history with Mert Lawwill and in his history through some family friends. And so I was able to restore this law wheel that belonged to a family friend of mine, that was passed on down to me. I feel very fortunate to have it. Completely original, belongs to a fellow flat track racer that raced with Mert in the Harley days. And that bike was in his garage until he passed. And I was fortunate enough to get it. So I was on a mission to try to get a Fisher RS1. And there's not a lot of them out there, and most of them wore out. And for those who maybe don't know, it's a law wheel link 4-bar bike that has a disc brake mount and a through axle from 1991. And those are things that you don't put together in the same sentence. And so a friend of mine who's a bit of a bike nut, he found a set of campy wheels on eBay that fit a law wheel. And so then he's like, well, that's weird. So then he connects with the guy who's got the wheels. He's like, hey, where'd you get these wheels? Like, well, they came off this frame. He's like, well, do you have the frame? He's like, yeah. So I'm selling it. I was like, well, you can't sell the wheels separate from the frame. I was like, well, who are you? I can do whatever I want. I'm just selling stuff on eBay. He's like, no, you can't separate those two items. And he got into an argument with the guy, and he's like, well, then why don't you buy the frame and the wheels if you feel so passionate about it? So he got the frame and the wheels, and I was like, oh, I showed my cards. Unfortunately, I was like, oh my God, that's like the most collectible bike of all time. I want that more than anything. So then he knew how much it was worth to me. And it took me like 2 years to get it from him. I ended up trading him. I think when the RockShox pipe came out, it was a pretty big deal. His bike was in desperate need of parts, and he needed a new fork more than he needed that law wheel. So I managed to trade him a brand new pike for the law wheel with the wheels. So that's one of my most collectible bikes. And I'm not like a campy guy, but I guess like that campy hub with the disc mount and the 14 mil axle is one of the most collectible Campanolo items like of all time. Of course, like I can't sell it. I got to keep the wheels around, even though I just have the frame. They gotta go to the grave with me.
The two of you are kind of lucky to have your business be bikes. I've only got, a 20 by 20 foot garage. So I'm limited to like 12 to 20 bikes is my max, but probably my top bike would be the Kestrel Rubicon. Back in 1996, I was in college working at a bike shop in Walnut Creek, California. Working at Performance Bike Shop in Walnut Creek, California. And the reason why that is important was I was racing cross country, and I had a Performance M006 or M007, which was like their top of the line hardtail, aluminum Easton frame. I had Machine Tech wheels built up with titanium spokes and yada, yada, yada. And I drove into San Francisco with some buddies, and I left my bike in the back of my friend's SUV with tinted windows, thinking it would be fine, but it's San Francisco and it wasn't fine. And that bike got stolen. And I don't know what I valued the bike at. I think, my homeowners thankfully covered it. And I think maybe I told them the bike was worth like $2,500, which I don't know. And they took depreciation and they wrote me a check for $1,800. And I'm working at Performance Bike Shop in Walnut Creek, California. Well, who lived in Walnut Creek, California at that time was Kurt Stockton and his wife. And his wife, his girlfriend at the time, Wendy Ingram. So she was a pro triathlete, did Ironman triathlons, and Kurt Stockton was a big time road racer, but getting into downhill. Sponsored by Kestrel, and he comes into the bike shop. Like if you Google Kestrel Rubicon, you see the Kestrel Rubicon, right? Red Ringley Slamma Jamma headset, red Ringley stem, red Ringley hubs, red Kuka cranks, red Ringley seat post. Magura brakes, red, prototype DHO, whatever. And I tell him the story of, whoa, my bike just got stolen. And he and I are about the same height. And he's like, well, do you need a bike? I'm like, yeah, I need a bike. He's like, what are you looking for? I'm like, cross country bike. He's like, well, I got something. And he rolls this thing in. And I'm like, dude, like, I don't even know what that bike would have been worth in 1996 or 1997. And I'm like, well, how much do you want for it? And I can't remember what he said. And I'm like, well, my insurance company wrote me a check for $1,850. He's like, done. And that was the bike I got. Was like, if you Google Kestrel Rubicon Kurt Stockton, I got that thing, which was like just total alien spacecraft. And at the time I was living in Oakland, which is no better than San Francisco, right? So I'd be taking BART, which is our subway, back and forth from home to work. And people would be like, what is that bike worth? I'm like, $500. Like the bike was so crazy, it ended up on the news one time, you know, like I had to change out all the red ring glaze stuff to like black control tech just to make it look boring. And then I ended up, it's one of the few bikes that I actually raced both cross country and downhill. I ended up, when the first Monster T came out, I bought a Monster T and put that on, and I was breaking frames. So I'd broken like 5 or 6 of these things, and I was telling Kestrel, like, dude, you got to make me one that's heavy, right? Like add more carbon, get rid of the aluminum pivots, make them out of steel. And I was talking to Preston Sandusky at Kestrel, no, we'll just re-engineer the layup. And after like breaking like 6 of them, I'm like, really, dude, I want a heavy, add as much carbon, add as much steel. And finally, like the 7th time around, they gave me like the beefy version with the disc mount, steel pivots, and that's called like the HD, or what's it called now, Jamie?
The SX?
Yeah. The heavy duty one.
Yeah.
I think they made it because I just kept breaking all their bikes and begging them for a heavy bike. I had Kevin Reese make custom coilover rear suspension for it. That thing was an absolute monster. And the funny thing was it actually pedaled, and the races I was doing were pedaling races. I had to sprint, and it would pedal better than like the M1s at the time. So for me, that's like my ultimate, like that's the bike, you know.
Yeah. Is that what's the suspension? Is that a high single pivot, or is that the crazy multi-link with the floating seat tube top tube?
Dude, it's the dumbest design. It's the dumbest design ever. So it's got a high single pivot with 2 shocks with a rocker link, right?
Yes.
But if you think about the rocker link is rotating this way, but then the top tube also rotates. So the top tube rotates this way and connects to the rocker link, which would create a mechanical bind because they're rotating in opposite directions. So the rocker link rocks on a rocker itself.
Right. You're suspending the rider, right? So
well, the seat would compress by 1.5 inches, and the rear wheel would compress by 7.5. So you'd get, the seat would compress by 1.75 inches, and the rear wheel would compress by 7.5. So you'd get 8 3/4 seated and 7.5 standing. And in order to get away from the mechanical binding, they had to actually float the rocker link on a pivot. Dumbest design ever, but I love that bike.
that is wild. So I got to spin this a little bit, and Jamie, it sounds like you have more bikes than both of us combined, but is there still a bike out there that you're trying to add to your collection? Is there a machine? I know I've got a couple.
I mean, there is some stuff, and it's not all downhill stuff. I'd love an early Klein, either in the Gator Fade or the Koi colorway. But I just can't bring myself to drop $8,000 on a rigid hardtail Klein, unfortunately. But I just like different stuff. So like the light speed over my shoulder, you know, the fact that it's a titanium downhill bike. I mean, it's the worst material in the world to make a downhill bike out of, you know, and there's so much meterage on tube, and there's probably about 60 foot of welding on the thing. But it's just cool. But they didn't make very many of them. So rarity, that for me, funkiness, unusual, quirky, stuff like that. But yeah, there's some rare stuff in my collection.
Yeah.
But, yeah, not if I see it, I know I want it. I just bought an Ancelotti the other week from France.
That's
wow.
way bigger on my list for sure. I would like a new Ancelotti and an old Ancelotti.
Yeah.
Are they still making bikes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just launched they just launched a new bike this week, and a bunch of my friends keep sending me text messages and linking Instagram images of it, because I always talk about how bad I want one. And it's just like a cobby silver polished single pivot with linkage, and the linkage is suddenly back in vogue because it's like what Specialized is using on their prototype downhill bikes. So it's a pivot instead of a 4-bar, but the way that the shock is driven is like an Ancelotti. And so all these people are talking about it. and this bike's getting all this play again. And it's like, it's probably having the most exposure that Ancelotti has ever had because of what Specialized is doing. It's so cool.
Is that similar to the new M1?
No, not really. No, it's not. It's
It is different, yeah.
Because I haven't seen what Specialized is doing because they're covering it.
You know, what's funny is if you just look at a GT RTS from 1992, you'd have a pretty good picture of what's going on with the lower link, like a bell crank pull link type system. That it's a great way to do things. It's super adjustable, low center of gravity, ultra tunable. They just did that with a 4-bar link, so they had it covered in a concealed bag for the last 2 years, and it comes out and you're like,
Pull shocks are coming back.
Yeah,
pull shocks for 2025.
I don't really have a unicorn myself. Like Jamie, you saw that mono 2-to-1 that I built up this last year that had the prototype. Had the prototype Kernut forks on it. That was just so bling, but like I'm too tall. I can't ride the thing. So, you know, I got rid of it. Like I'm looking for something long but retro, and I don't know what that is yet.
Sounds like you need a Rotec.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not in love with Rotec, but yeah, a lot of people have said they're pretty long.
Well, you should have kept the Big John bike made by Robbie.
Yeah, the Durango.
The Durango. That thing's huge.
Dude, that thing
it's like 55, 57 pounds, that thing.
Yeah.
But it's never going to break. Sorry?
Big John's bike.
Do you know Big John?
Yeah, he's actually a good friend of mine. I used to build his bikes.
It's a small world.
I helped him get the first Durango built. I talked to Robbie on the phone about that first Durango. And it was so funny because he's a huge dude. And I think I talked him into it was a poor choice because there was no good forks. I talked him into a White Brothers UD150.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was using. And I was talking to those guys a lot. And we built this whole thing up. It took like forever to build, half a year project. And he grabbed the front brake and the fork just bottomed super hard. I was like, oh no. But we were at Norban National, Deer Valley, and those guys put like
for people that don't know, John Casey, I think is his last name.
Yeah.
He's got to be 6'5", 350 pounds. I mean, just like the biggest linebacker you've ever seen, and a super nice guy. And he's been riding as long as all of us have been riding.
Oh yeah, he's
I think the one that I've got is got Monster T on the front. It's a blue front end with a silver rear end, double wides. Can't remember what hubs are on it. Hope Biggins, I think. But everything is just oversized, and it's 57 pounds. I think I think it came to you, Chuck, and I think you reshipped it to me.
Yeah, John was living in Oakland, and he was moving to Utah. So he lives out somewhere near you now, Chris. And he knew that I was running the vintage page, and he pinged me. He's like, Chuck, I need to find a good home for this bike. I'm like, I'll find it a good home, but I'm only limited to my garage. I can only have like 20 bikes before I'm out of space. And so now that bike lives in Britain at Jamie's house.
That is so cool. That's amazing. What an awesome.
I'll send you some pictures of it, Chris.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. That's like a walk down memory lane. Oh man,
it's such a small. So I don't know how you guys are doing on time. This is going to be our longest podcast to date. How are you guys doing on time?
I'm up. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Something we mentioned, and let's just bring it up and see where it goes. Talking with you, Chris, and talking with some other people, professionals and ex-downhillers in the sport, it has come to my mind that people have gotten hurt, gotten traumatic brain injuries, multiple concussions, and after they leave the sport, they don't thrive. And that's to put it lightly. A lot of people have substance abuse problems. They're just not doing great. And I'm happy to see that you're doing great. You're running a business, you're a dad, you're a husband, and you're helping kids and giving back to the community. Is there anything going on in our sport where from back in the day people were getting hurt? Is it a particular mentality that leads people into our sport that once they retire from riding, they have to go and do something else to placate themselves? Is there anything going on there?
Yeah,
I know
I think so.
personally, I've had 5 concussions and I don't ride as hard as you do, right?
Yeah, I've had, I think, 7 concussions that I remember.
Yeah.
So I always like to joke that there's probably some that I don't remember at all. I think that there are a number of parallels there. And part of it is, I mean, the mountain biking, the sport of mountain biking has matured a ton, especially over the last couple of years with head injury awareness. But I think that we had a lot of folks who were naturally risk takers, who were pretty happy-go-lucky, maybe financially, very living simple lives, like living in their van, traveling around, working a summer job so they could go to bike races. So they were just really like relaxed people in general, not taking a lot of medical things seriously. And I think there's a ton of people that are just naturally risk takers and are a little bit averse to risk injury. Just don't, it doesn't register with them for the same way as it does maybe like whatever you want to call a normal person. And then I think that if you were a competitive cyclist, if you suffered a head injury, say you broke your leg and you had a contract. Well, maybe your contract will still be there for you. You still get paid, but if you have a head injury, it's really hard to show what kind of injury you have. And so people are expected to continue to compete. And this has happened up until very, very recently. And so that has been a major problem of the awareness and just talking about it. Just most people kept that sort of thing a secret. And as we've learned so much with head injuries now, that it affects the human mind in so many ways, and everybody has their own experience with it. It's difficult to predict. So I think a lot of people have lived with post traumatic stress in a way that they don't really talk about. And so there's a lot of people that I think suffer from depression and anxiety and maybe get into drugs to replace the feeling that they had, or trying to find a feeling that they can't replace. And I mean, it's happened. I think most people, that were a downhill racer back in the day have suffered from some pretty major traumatic brain injuries. And unless you were in a coma or something, people didn't really talk about it. You can have a really gnarly head injury and not ever be unconscious and never even notice that anything happened until later that day. You have one of your buddies is like stuck on repeat and asking the same question over and over and over again, realize that this person's having like a serious problem. And
personally, I was just totally ignorant. I would be, I got a concussion up at Whistler and did exactly what you're not supposed to do. I went down to the bar and started drinking, popped some Advil, and got back on my bike. And that's like at least 3 concussions. That's what I did. Like I would just go have a bunch of beer, drink some have a bunch of beer, have some Advil, and get back on the bike. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what you're not supposed to do. But I didn't know any better. And it was part of that kind of, I don't know, kind of tough guy mentality, because you're hanging around with a bunch of guys and, you don't want to show weakness. You got to get back on the bike, right?
Yeah, it is really unfortunate. It's taken until I think the last handful of years when you have companies like Red Bull they have kind of their independent medical doctors and private hospitals and things where they're willing to and happy to engage and help their athletes move forward and will happily recognize it. And they're working in competitive sports fields where they're seeing head injuries from motorsports and mountain biking and all of these other things. And they're all the same kind of athletes that they interact with. So they see head injuries a lot more often than maybe any other hospital or industry would see it. And so they've made so many strides, and they have a lot of special procedures that they do and things that help to recognize it and how to heal. I was just listening to this really amazing podcast with Tawny Seagrave talking about how she had spent the last year in recovery and all of the different things that she was doing. And she's like, her reaction skills were really great. If they were trying to diagnose her, she seemed really with it. Her cognitive was great, but she was extremely depressed and unable to take care of herself. And she would hop on her bike and she would feel good one minute and not the next, and was still competitive at racing. And it took a long time for her to find the right kind of care. And this is in our modern era. So
because as we push boundaries as riders, it comes more and more to the forefront. I mean, you see when, you know, like G Atherton, when he had his big crash a couple of years ago, where he was doing the line in Wales, and he just ragdolled, you know, and that's a long recovery after that. You know, it's a good year, 18 months to get back to full fighting strength after an injury like that. And it takes a lot to get your mindset back in line for that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think it's caused a lot of people to go down a certain path because it wasn't recognized and it changed who they were as a person, and they weren't able to get the care that they needed. So they end up working a different kind of job or hanging out with a different kind of people, falling out of the sport they love, making enemies with loved ones. And if they were able to get that support and get through to recover to a place where they kind of recognize who they were again, they could get back to living the same life that they were, or something that resembled that. But I think there's a lot of people that live completely different lives now, and they don't seem like the same person. And they didn't ever get an opportunity to have a whole group of people come around them and help them to slow down, get them back on the right path. And like you said, you get a head injury and you start using drugs, or you get another head injury and it compounds it, then you could get some pretty serious irreversible damage. But that sort of thing just wasn't recognized for so long. You thought that maybe if you could just get back on your bike and get back in your right mindset, that your brain would maybe heal because you're focusing. But it's that kind of focus that some folks aren't able to do. And it could make it worse for some people, and it could make it better for some people. But you have to go through a program to try these different techniques to see what is helping you and what is hindering you to take you down the right path to recovery. And it's just really complex.
I think competing, you know, and taking part in a sport at the level that we've been at, one is a gift. Like most people in society haven't ever experienced what we have. You know, just screaming down a race course where you literally have just left your fear behind and you're just going full throttle and you're living on the edge. And that's the type of presence that people try to achieve, like through meditation and stuff. But you can achieve a level of presence just by, you know, hucking yourself down a trail and trying not to die. Like that absolute mental focus, most people you talk to will never experience that. And once you do, and then you get old, like we are, you can't do that anymore. So what do you replace it with, right? Yeah. So for me personally, I just became a bike geek. I started this podcast. I started this group. I do trail advocacy, started a nonprofit this year to do trail maintenance. That's the way that I fulfill that part, you know, because I'm no longer racing. But not everybody has found that anything to replace that with in their life the way that I have. But that leads me to my next question. And I'm not suggesting your motivation for it, but you are doing coaching and consulting and training and bringing up the next generation of downhillers. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my wife and I started a gravity development program called Racecraft about 5 or 6 years ago. And I started it for a few reasons. I mean, one, because it was a reason for an excuse to stay in the competitive side of mountain biking. And also, I just felt compelled to offer the things that I had learned throughout my career. As we were talking about how mountain biking is only 1 or 2 generations old, there's not a whole lot that you can fall back on. There's not a ton of history. And if you're looking like in the ski world, you could find ski coaching history that's lasted 100 years. But the bike coaching has really only happened in the last decade or so. As folks like us have reached an age where we feel like we're ready to step a little bit back from our personal goals, and you're looking for something bigger. And I feel like, the city of Salt Lake in Utah has grown a lot with our recognition of our sport. But I felt like when I was young, I was always looking to Southern California or Colorado or Canada or France or somewhere that was like where mountain biking was a big thing. And it wasn't here. So I've kind of had a little personal motivation to help to kind of mature the sport in our region. And so we do coaching for mountain biking, for gravity, and some free ride stuff too, for downhill and enduro for teenage and young adults. And I take a lot of pride in like setting up a circumstance where you can remove all of the barriers and create a kind of controlled situation and something that's kind of chaotic. to try to remove all of the challenges that young racers have, of the logistical challenges, and getting over the nerves and finding the right mindset, and then also with the equipment and the tuning. Because if you can mitigate some of these risks, then you can make something that's inherently dangerous a bit safer and a bit more something that's a bit more sustainable. And so I really love to show up to a bike race and have a race pit set up so that we have food and shelter and a mechanic and scheduled practice, and someone like my wife Leslie, who's very talented in the field of mindset, and she can help people get in the right mindset so they're not riding so scared, so that you're less likely to have an injury. You can focus on positivity and focus on your strengths, and try to mitigate risk in a way of the circumstances that you're in. If you find you're wanting to hit like a jump or a drop, find a jump or a drop that's a tabletop or has a sandy run out rather than something that's got a jagged cliff on one side. So you can progress in a safer scenario. So then you can go back to a more challenging area that you've always wanted to tick off and be able to do that challenging thing, because you've already done the preparation with doing it in a little more of a controlled situation. You've learned your bike, you've learned your braking, you've thought about how to prepare mentally. So it's become quite a passion of mine, and it's really fulfilling for me.
What age group are you coaching?
We have kids that are like 9 years old up to like around 20 or so.
Cool.
We started off with kids that were like kind of capable of pedaling of like 12 to 18, but every couple of years, because our sport is still progressing so much, that there are kids that are 9 years old that have been to Whistler, and they got a coaching lesson at Whistler, and now they're way better than dad. And dad's like, where do I put this kid? I need this kid to be in a controlled situation with riders that he can go out and learn from, that are going to help him navigate in something that's inherently risky, and try to make it, to minimize the risk, and also put him in a positive group of other riders that have a similar mindset, that instead of trying to beat your friend, you're trying to have your personal best ride down the mountain. And it's something that's really unique for mountain biking and enduro racing, downhill, because it's a time trial format. It's an individual race. You're part of a team, so you can try to help your friend ride the best they can. And they might beat you, you might beat them, but you're just trying to beat your timed run from practice. You just want to have your own best run. So you don't have to elbow somebody out of the corner, knock them down, trash talk them. So there's so much more room for positivity in this time trial format. But it also is a team environment, because it takes a group of people to safely navigate practice, and have mechanics, and have people on course, and have medical staff and people in your corner to help you work through really hard things. So it's such a unique sport that there's not much like it in the world. And it just happens to be something that I've always loved. So I'm just kind of trying to help to with that progression. It's a little bit of a cliche, but you're just trying to like give back and make it better. And you want to provide something that you didn't have when you were a kid. When I was a kid, I would take my mountain bike to the shop for a break-in tune, and I would get ridiculed for damaging it. And like, you should be a BMX bike. You've ruined this nice bike. I was like, well, I'm just out like hitting jumps. I weigh like 90 pounds, man. I'm just having fun. And to be talked down to from someone that you had put up on a pedestal, like the head mechanic at the bike shop, who you thought was so cool, and then to trash talk you for thrashing your bike, that sets you back. It might push you out of the sport permanently. And now there's, you're commended for it. And there's so much more equipment and so many people, that someone comes in with a wrecked bike and you're like, this kid's on the cross country team, but his forks are blown and his bars are bent. Like, who is this kid? What are you up to?
Yeah.
What are you doing for fun? Oh, this kid's hitting jumps until dark every night after cross country practice. Like, this is the kind of kid that should be hanging out with our group of riders, so that he can progress in the right way, so he doesn't end up getting hurt and trashing his bike, and his parents end up getting into a different sport.
Yeah, I love the fact that it is all inclusive. You can get a bunch of people together, 40, 30, 20, and 15 years old, and you can all ride, and you all ride, just have fun. And one of the things we used to do as a company was, when we would sponsor prizes at the nationals, we would never put them up for first, second, and third place, because those guys are sponsored. Chances are something that cost you $100, they were going to give it away for $50 or something like that. So we always did 100th, 200th, and 300th fastest times of the day, because giving back to the guys that never expect to get anything. They paid the same entry fees, they paid the same race fees, but for them, they never expected to get anything. They knew they were doing it for fun, and when you give them something back, it blew their mind. And that was a nice thing, nice feeling when you see someone get something they're not expecting, and you know. But it's all about that all inclusion thing again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it just kind of takes you back to like we talk about process-based goals versus outcome-based goals. You ask the kid, like, okay, what are your goals this year? Oh, I want to be on the podium. It's like, okay, well, the chances of you being on the podium is like, there's 20 kids here and 3 kids get to be on the podium if you're fast enough and you have it right. But like, what else are your goals? Like, how about like having a clean run? How about like giving it 100% without blowing up? You know, where are those goals at? And that's a completely different kind of mindset that most people never really think about. And it's pretty hard to be like, I'm here to win. You're watching other people. You're watching the other guy who had set the fastest time. You're not thinking about your own line. Maybe some guy's got a different skill set than you do. You know, or girl, you know, you might have the mental skills to not be nervous, but you just don't have the raw power. And so you're going to finesse your way down the hill, and it's okay to take a different line that works for you. You should, you know, focusing on yourself. And it's a tough sport when there's only a few people that get a prize. And if you're there to win a bike race, it's probably not going to work out for you, because you're probably not going to win that bike race. You might win once a year. You may never, but you can always progress. You can always get better at cornering, and you can have a super clean line and have an awesome race run that was like relatively low risk, that you could go back and do it again. You can go back and have some party laps after the race is over and not leave totally bummed thinking about the girl that beat you. You know, you think about how well you rode that weekend. And that's something that you can work on your whole life. Like I made friends, or rekindled a relationship with an old friend who became a coach on my team. And he has all these skills that like I haven't worked on. Like, I'm so much better at cornering now than I was a year ago. Like, we work on cornering all the time. And just like with mindset, like things that I learned from my wife, I feel like I'm a far better racer now than I ever was. And I'm not risking it. I don't injure myself that often. I don't wreck my bike that often. But if I get whatever mid-pack finish and I had a run where it's like, okay, I metered my output and I got that corner perfect and I hit my breaking points, and like I feel like I did the run I wanted to do, like it's a win. And I'm stoked. I'm happy about it. And we're trying to portray that to the other people on the team so that they can keep progressing, and they may hit this goal of, I mean, sure, you want to win a race. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And perhaps that will happen if you continue on this path of trying to improve. And there's so many ways to do it in mountain biking. And it's such a unique sport that way. The one of a kind.
Smooth is fast, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Focus on that and the speed will come, and you enjoy yourself and you live to ride another day, right?
Yeah.
But people weren't saying that when we were coming up.
Oh, no, it was whoever
No.
gets the biggest, whoever's got the biggest balls, get back
Yeah.
up from a crash and do it again. It's like we've moved so far forward in this one like lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing. It's what makes our sport so unique.
So you're coaching in person primarily around Salt Lake area?
Yeah. We've grown our business to have a handful of coaches and a few different levels. And I do a lot of coaching myself, but I also have started to teach coaching and help some of my younger riders work into a coaching profession, which is like really rewarding in its own, so that you're kind of creating job opportunities within our industry, and allows me to step back a little bit and look at it in a little bit bigger picture to grow the business. And therefore, the more the business grows, the more kids get the opportunity to experience our program. And that's really rewarding too. Yeah. But I spent a lot of time
on bikes. Kids on bikes is just a worthwhile goal, right? I mean, every kid is being exposed to the internet and video games and television, and those things are fine, but they need to be outside, right? And getting in a workout, getting in exercise, getting outside into nature, and bikes is the perfect way to do that.
Absolutely.
Now you also run Go Ride. Do you own?
Yeah, so I manage this location down in Draper. If you're ever in the Utah area, we have 2 stores. I mostly have a frame collection down here, but our Salt Lake shop's got a little higher ceilings. We've got a Minty M1 with a full XTR and a Dorado on the front. And there's a Tomac that's completely period correct. There's a whole bunch of really cool complete bikes that a few friends have donated. And so we're a mountain bike specialty shop, and we started with downhill and have moved more into all around mountain biking, but we cater to all the off-road options here in the Salt Lake area. Yeah.
And are you primarily a local bike shop, or are you still doing web sales? I think there was a period of time that you used to advertise doing like web sales. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, no, it's mostly local. We started almost exclusively online, and we were doing like fork service and some pickups and some frame builds and stuff locally with a small shop. But it's funny, when we started, we were importing Dainese body armor and sending frames to Europe and Japan, and sending Foes bikes to extremely unique locations, and then importing Mavic rims and things that are hard to get into this country. And now you can buy a good pair of knee pads and a sticky rubber tire at most good bike shops. And so the market sort of came to us, where we have enough local riders looking for the type of equipment that we love, that we can just be focused on local sales. And now there are a lot of internet giants that just didn't exist back in 2000. So the most businesses that have gone online, we've sort of gone the opposite, and we've gone more local over time, which is pretty unique.
Yeah, I think that's rad. Riding at the level that we do with the level of bikes that we have, it's hard to find bike shops that are adept at the type of suspension, tuning and brake bleeding and stuff that I need. So when I find that local bike shop that has that capability, I'm like, they're my best friend, and we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kris, I don't have anything else. This is our longest podcast so far at 2 hours and 15 minutes. We've covered quite a gamut. Is there anything else you feel like the world should know about Kris Baughman?
Oh man, I think we've covered it pretty well. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been super fun. I have this history, but I also just feel like a bike geek and a mountain biker who's still addicted, who can't wait to get out on a ride. And I'm just happy to share that stoke with everyone else. And I look forward to seeing more of your podcast to meet other riders. And I've learned a lot from all of the podcasts that I've watched so far. And it's just a great experience. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come on with y'all.
I love bringing history that not everybody has heard before, to the fore. I love helping people brag that don't otherwise or wouldn't otherwise brag. There's a lot of people like you who are maybe humble and wouldn't be out there like saying, hey, I was the first guy at the first Red Bull and I helped create the thing. So I'm helping some people get that word out. And we have some more people coming on who did stuff, that people don't know about, and they're humble, and we want to share that history. And if they won't brag, we'll brag for them. Hopefully we can make them blush and have a good time in the process. So really appreciate you coming on today. I think you guys noticed I was struggling with lighting. We're having a sunny day here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm in my sunroom. So apologize for my on and off video presence. I was fighting with the sun. But
I appreciate it, Chuck. And it's really nice to meet with you, Jamie.
Yeah, you too, Kris.
Guys, thank you. We will call that a wrap. And this will go up in about 2 weeks. And Kris, I might follow up with you after to see if you have any pictures you want to share or anything like that. But otherwise, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, guys. I sure appreciate it.